Welcome to 2024, everyone, and welcome back to Understories. This week, we speak to Daniel Nelson, founder of October Communications, a UK-based PR and marketing agency that works with architects and designers. Daniel is an old friend and colleague, and we worked together collaboratively for many years. He's a talented digital marketer whose work is really about supporting original thinkers and, most importantly, helping them differentiate in an incredibly crowded architecture market. In this conversation, we touch on everything from agile approaches in architecture to franchise models to collaborations with bigger agencies. It's a perfect episode for those of you who are a bit confused about digital marketing and the role it plays in promoting your design business. Before we dive in, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating or review wherever you're watching or listening to this. Tell a friend. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so that you get notified about future episodes, which come out every Tuesday. And now, here's Daniel Nelson. Well, we're here today with Daniel Nelson of October Communications. Welcome, Daniel. It's so nice to have you. It's so exciting.
So nice to be here.
I feel like it's been ages, I think, since we last caught up. But for people that don't know you, can you explain a little bit more about what you do, what October Comms is about, and we can get it started that way?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm Daniel Nelson. I started October Communications. It was 10 years ago, almost to the day. It was 13th of December. So,
oh my God. Happy anniversary. Oh my God.
I know, yeah. I think back to 10 years. It's quite exhausting 10 years. We're a PR and marketing agency that work with architects and designers in all sorts of things all over the world in a way. So we've got clients in the US, in different parts of Europe, and the UK, which is where we're based. Well, I'm going to say based in London, but we're very much remote workers. So that's not really the case.
How big is the team now?
There's 4 kind of active and then 2 support.
Okay.
So, yeah. Yeah, we work mostly with architects and designers, mostly on their marketing side of things, whether that's press, social, email, like a lot of lead generation work, because that's what everyone really ultimately wants when they hire somebody. Even if they maybe ask for something different, they all want leads.
Yeah.
So they would. So, yeah, that's kind of the business that we started 10 years ago and still running it today.
Now, because obviously you and I know each other from previous lives, but yeah. Like, how has the business evolved a lot over the last 10 years? Or, I mean, you just said you've been doing the same stuff, but have you changed your approach over time?
Yeah, actually, that's true. It has changed quite a lot in the 10 years. Well, I mean, still, it's always been architects and designers. There were actually a lot more design companies early on, and then it sort of shifted towards architecture rather than it always being at the beginning. But there was no kind of conscious decision to do that. It just naturally happened. Maybe it was where my interests went, I guess. We were doing a lot of furniture companies at the beginning. But I think probably the thing that we started to narrow in on, and actually two years ago, I think I disappeared off to Greece for a few months.
Yeah, I remember. Following your exploits on Instagram, enjoying being so jealous.
It was very nice. It sounds very glamorous, just disappearing off. But I spent a bit of time really thinking, what is the purpose of this company? Like, rather than just going through the motions all the time, and then defined what connects all of our clients. And I realized that I kind of saw them all as original thinkers. And our job is to support original thinkers. That's what came out of that sort of soul searching. And it's because they don't necessarily have to be, like contemporary or modern design. It doesn't have to be, like I was thinking, what is the difference? Like, how do I join them all up? And I realized, it's the thing when I can spot something that somebody is doing and they're really passionately trying to explore something new rather than just go through the motions and churn something out, or like trawl in Pinterest boards and just putting the same thing out there that's already exists. So as long as that's there, then that's kind of what has always connected everyone, I think, without me knowing it.
That's so interesting. So the idea of being original thinker, is it because then it gives you an opportunity to do original thinking with them to help them think originally, I guess. So like
Yeah,
a
I
weird
guess so.
question. Hmm.
Yeah, that maybe they're a bit more. I think it's probably more just what I enjoy more than
Hmm.
anything. It
Probably
probably
more
goes,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, rather than just because when we're talking to the press or we're thinking about how to like present somebody, I'm always looking for what's that thing that differentiates them from everyone
Hmm.
else. Like, say, an architect, what's the thing that differentiates them? And private residential architecture in London, it's like you can't swing a cat without hitting 1,000 private residential architects.
Yeah, this
So,
is so
like,
true. I mean, yeah, this is really true. In fact, it's funny because I've been talking to people over the last few weeks a lot about this very thing, especially within residential
right,
architecture, because everyone's starting to, the themes that keep coming out is that work's drying up, clients have
yeah,
they have like less money, and I keep start thinking about this thing about how like making yourself distinctive within a really, really crowded market, especially somewhere like in London, where there's, as you said, you can't swing a cat without hitting one, is such a challenge. Because I think, I don't know, I mean, you probably know this better than I do because of what you do, but like it's really difficult for architects to define themselves because
yeah,
I think they've been so trained to be generalists in a lot of ways. So how do you work with them on this one? Because this is, I mean, I do this as well, and it's just like, it's
yeah,
like really hard to kind of get them to be like, no, it's not residential architecture. It's much bigger than that. It's much more what you do.
yeah. Yeah, I was thinking this is where we cross over a lot, isn't it? Really, because you kind
Yeah,
of get into that strategy, the same kind of thing. But
yeah.
well, we did it together years back, but we always start with a workshop so that we can try and
Mm.
draw out. And often, especially if there's multiple directors in, it's quite good to get them on because they've probably never had this conversation either. What is
No.
the so?
What are we here for? What are we wanting? What are we trying to achieve? That kind of thing.
Yeah, you suddenly realise that they don't say anything that's the same, and so you've got to try and find this common ground together for
Mm.
them. Um,
Mm.
but I'm always trying to draw out like what are they interested. Why did they even get into architecture in the first place? Like because
Mm.
sometimes we had this with one client years back where he essentially wanted to be John Pawson. It was like there's, but was
Right.
doing nothing like that. Was all of the work was nothing like that, and so through this kind of workshop, realized he started to get more excited about work again because he was like, "Yeah, I want to do this kind of work. I don't want to do this kind of work, but we're just sort of doing it." So we then kind of were working out a strategy to kind of move him away from the work that he didn't really want to do towards the work that he did.
So that, I mean, I think that right there in itself is one of the biggest challenges that so many designers and architects find because it's like it's as you and I both know, it's all fine and good being in like the big high level strategy, excited, but then actually, how do you make that switch? Like, I think
Yeah,
people, I mean, my experience so far has been that it takes time. Like, you have to be willing and
yeah,
be really consistent about your messaging and keep kind of, but you can't expect it to happen within a year. Maybe it can take 5 years, right? Like, it can take a while if you're really trying to
okay.
shift a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
ship.
Okay. I mean, I'd probably think could do some of it faster. I, I mean, the way that I approach it is look at the different channels available to us. And
Right,
so, for instance, if their work is coming in through word of mouth, then that's fine. It doesn't matter what we do; it's not going to affect that. So,
right.
so we can change the website, we can change their social media, can
Yeah,
change all the messaging. That word of mouth is still going to keep happening.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so suddenly, and we then start doing a lot of search engine optimization work and things for keywords that might draw in the type of client that they're looking for. And then, as long as the
Can you
website is
say,
working,
well, can you say a bit
yeah,
more about that? Because I think that, I mean, we've talked about this for sure, definitely, is that,
yeah,
especially if you're doing like like a design-led practice and you're trying to attract a certain type of client, how
mm,
do you avoid being like, obviously you want to be found, but you also don't want to have everyone contact you, right? So how do you work with SEO to kind of help, say, a design-led practice to actually do it properly?
yeah. That's been the challenge over the years. Actually, I've learned so much doing it for clients that we've really refined. The only problem is that this year It's just the leads are kind of drying up, so it's
Yeah.
harder to get those. But that's almost made us have to double down on making sure that we're hitting the right people,
Right.
because if there could be missed opportunities. But there's a few different parts to it. One, what keywords we're focusing on, and there's this. I'm going to try and keep this broad for the people listening, so that I'm not getting too technical, but enough detail so it's actually useful. Is finding the right keyword, and there's long tail and short tail keywords. Short tail being like maybe 1 or 2 words. So like, let's say residential architect, and that's going to be so broad, that's going to get everyone, isn't it? So that's not really too helpful.
Like residential architect Hampstead, or would be like slightly more narrow, right?
Yeah. It starts to get a bit. At least then, people in Hampstead are gonna. There's probably going to be less competition for that keyword. Lots of people will go after residential architect because it's got a higher volume of search. That kind of thing. But then there's long tail, which are the longer questions that people ask into Google. So like, how do I get planning permission in Hampstead Garden Suburb, or something like that. Or how do I get listed building consent on, those longer kind of keywords. They might have like smaller volume of traffic because they're quite long sentences, but they can be really valuable, because if you're answering that question, then you've almost won them over by that point. They're not going to go looking for other architects.
So that's a case then where you need to understand what kind of questions that your ideal client is asking, right? And so then that's the work on the other side of it, isn't it? So that they have to, you have to know what they're looking for first, because otherwise then it'll be just like a machine gun approach of just trying to see who comes through the door.
Yeah. I mean, I also find the website has to do a lot of convincing. It's one of the things I always end up changing, because a lot of architecture websites are just portfolios and they're not really sales machines. They're not really set up like that. But we always try and introduce a form that people have to fill out, and that form is kind of filtering a little bit. So, and I mean, the design of the site also can reflect. So if you are actually at the lower end and you're looking for lots of smaller jobs, you kind of want to appear maybe a bit less expensive. You don't want to be too premium. But if you are at the top end, you want to be really premium. So looking at fashion websites and things and thinking, how do I bring those graphic elements in? Because you can't really talk about cost. It's a bit crass. You can't say, we only start at £500,000.
I have seen some studios that are starting to do this though, which I kind of respect, because it does it's an instant filter, right? Because they're like, we don't work for anything under $1 million. I'm like, more power to you.
I mean, I guess you can do it. I have seen it. I always wonder on the client side if they're they're very cost focused. All of them are. Doesn't matter how much money they've got. Cost is going to be one.
And sometimes the more money they have, the more cost focused they are, right?
Yeah. And I just wonder how they react to seeing it like that, where they'd be like, well, why are you saying that? But I don't know. We can debate that for years.
Yeah, I know. I mean, yeah.
But it definitely has to. I mean, I've talked to. I was mentioning this to you the other day, wasn't I? Was the way in which you might get leads in that aren't quite the right fit. I'm always looking at what percentage of leads that is, and most of the time they just get kind of a reply back saying, this is not quite right for us, like good luck with your search. And that's normally quite a large portion of leads, and I'm like, there's lost work there, there's revenue there that could be used in different ways, whether it's taking on that work, but maybe actually it's even filtering that through to other practices who could take it on and having a relationship there, even a commission structure for sending. All of that work, all of that marketing effort then is sort of slightly wasted on however many come through that are wrong. But
I mean, do you think there's a part of this that I think up until probably, well, I don't even think this is the case now, but I've been thinking a lot about the productization of architecture and how so many of the people that we both work with are, design-led studios. Everything has to be bespoke. They're artists, and it's a real challenge to kind of put that into the box of product, because it means that it somehow seems to like be a little bit dirty or like cheapen the offer they're doing. But you're right, there is like some missing revenue there that could be captured quite easily if you had, say, something like, I don't know, just concept only, and then they give it to a builder to do, or, they offer some furniture suggestions for the space, or just something that's like a little bit that they don't have to expend too much effort, and they could process size, so it'd be really efficient to do.
Yeah.
Turn a few grand out of it quite easily.
I definitely think this. I always look at it and think, if you just sort of step outside and look at the business and all of these different parts and where the revenue could come from, having that, okay, we focus on the really bespoke, luxury, high-end private residential here, and then we've also got the smaller things. How do we service all of those and make a profit in all of those different divisions? And that it also helps just secure you in different economic climates, because there's normally up and down on all of them. Sometimes they will go down, sometimes they will go up. But if you were starting any business, you would think about my different revenue streams. Whereas architecture, it doesn't start like that, it seems.
No, there's one revenue stream.
Yeah.
It's design work, that's it.
It's kind of funny.
Do you find that as a hard sell for people when you're talking to them about this? Like, can you say more about that?
I have actually pitched that idea quite recently, and it fell very flat.
What was the response? Like, what did they say?
I think they were fairly polite to just sort of like, let's come back to that, but we really want to just focus on the strategy to get more of the high end residential work,
right.
And that's fine. But because there's always a strategy can be created for that and to grow those things. I mean, that one in particular, if you want to grow quickly, we were thinking, well, you've got to pump a lot of money into advertising. That's going to be our short-term solution. Because we've got to reach a lot of people. But their response to and I sort of brought it back up again later, thinking, okay, now we've got that going, let's discuss this in a more sensible way. But I think, like I mentioned to you, that I've realized over the years, it's kind of architects are artists, and I'm cheapening what they do by suggesting that. So I need to find a new approach to suggesting that this is a possible, because the same, a fashion designer is an artist in the same way, but there is a business structure behind that. And it's much the same.
I don't understand why. This is probably something I think about way too much, but it's why architecture, for some reason, has managed to bypass the commerciality side of it. And some people would say it's the education system, or some people would say that, well, I think most of them actually would say it's the education system, because I think they're taught in a way that sort of has this. There's an element of subservience sometimes. There's an element of like, kill yourself to get the design right. But I don't know. But then, something like fashion, or, I don't even know. Maybe fashion's probably the best example, is that there isn't that they have to sell. They understand that it's not just for the sake of art. Yeah.
They can't survive on that. There was one client a few years back that I remember had a great idea, and it's probably bad of me to share this, but we don't work with them anymore. So no, I won't name them, and then that's the way around it. But they were talking about a franchise model for architecture, and I was like, okay, tell me more. I'm listening.
Interesting.
And it was that everyone starts their own practice, and in fact, actually, I opened up some data before this, because the what they called the architectural. Oh no, I've forgotten what the name of the organisation is. That the detail
ARP.
How many. It's not. Hold on, let me go. I can see I'm on page 37, so I'll go back to. It's the. Oh no, they haven't even got the name of them there. The Architects Council of Europe.
Oh, okay.
And it was showing how many architecture practices there are in the UK. They do kind of this report, and I think there's like 11,000 architecture practices in the UK, but nearly 8,000 of those are one person.
Yes.
which is 60%.
You're the second person who's told me about this. And I'm just
Right.
like, oh my God. Like, so there's either
Yeah.
micro practices.
Yeah. That makes up most of, I mean, even up to 1 to 3 staff. I think if you do 1 to 3, so you're encompassing all of those, it's like 82% of practices are 1 to 3. So, and then I looked, okay, are these are these like moonlighting? Are they kind of doing a bit of extra architecture on the side? But
Sure.
I think 51% of them are limited companies. So, I mean, which, sure, that's fine to set up. But that means that they're taking it a bit more seriously, maybe, and they're not just doing a couple of jobs on the side.
Yeah, I go back and forth on this one. I think that there's a lot of times people set up practices and think they need to be a limited company. And
Right.
because if you're going to build a company, you got to build a company, but then they set up a limited company and create all these sort of corporate structures that they have to have. And yet they only ever want to be 1 or 2 people. Yeah, and I'm like, you don't need to do that. You could be a sole trader. You can even work with freelancers that way, and you could even have people that work for you. You know, you don't have to have that.
Yeah.
I don't know why they go for the limited company route, but
yeah, is there something to do with liability they're thinking about?
possibly, yeah, possibly, yeah.
But yeah, suddenly the costs increase. You've got more expensive accounting costs and things as a limited company.
Yeah.
Why was I thinking that? I've lost my train of thought. Hold on, I went, oh yeah, I know why. No, I don't know why. We were talking about the fashion companies, and then
we were talking about the ACE, right? And how like practices are mainly micro practices. But I mean, actually, I've got a slightly deviant. While you're thinking of what you're going to say, it's fine. I was thinking about this idea of growth around businesses, and obviously, if you're working as a digital marketer, like part of your job is to build growth, right, and to help your clients build growth. How do you negotiate that if they are, say, like we were just talking about these sort of 1, 2, 3 man women practices?
Yeah,
they want more leads. But like, they don't want to grow really because they're kind of scared of the idea of growth. So you don't want to create a beast. We've all heard the sort of the story. Like how do you negotiate those sort of 2 sides of that coin?
In some ways, it's a bit easier. I've had a few conversations with people, and mostly, I'm sure you have exactly the same thing. They'll tell me our business comes through word of mouth. That's normally what sort of started them off. And then they're kind of seeing how unreliable that is for the work. That it might finish for a bit and you're kind of waiting to try and get a referral to then get the next piece of work. So it's the up and down, this feast and famine that they will suffer from. So they're looking for more reliable pipeline of leads that they can reject or, will be free in 3 months' time, And so I did this a few years back with, it was sort of one man. I think he had a part-time kind of part one that was helping. So small practice. And I think it was within like 3-4 months, he was suddenly saying, we're getting so many more leads now. I don't really need you anymore. I was quite happy with that. That's a success. And that's what, like, it was really fast because when essentially you're starting with them having done nothing. And so anything that we start doing has an impact versus a bigger practice or one that's been going for a lot longer. You're trying to affect things that are already in motion. They're already posted on social media. They're already doing events or like having meetings with people. So it's harder to shift that needle a bit more. Whereas definitely with this, and actually I've been working on, it was about a year ago, started to work on different strategies for different stages of companies. So much like,
that's interesting. Say more about that.
Yeah, I realized that, well, a friend of mine actually, he wanted to start his own residential practice in London. Surprise, surprise.
Got any cat?
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, and they come from, there's 2 of them that want to start up. They both come from good backgrounds, like, big practices. But that might not mean anything to somebody when they start on their own. And I was realizing, most of the strategy that we do wouldn't really work because there's an immediate cost because we're starting to spend money on things and you haven't actually already got some work to help cover that. So I've got to think about how to start this company with no budget. or very little budget. And so I started looking at all the different tactics and sort of grouping them by what stage a company is at and which ones will be most effective. So say search engine optimization, I know will take maybe 6 months, maybe a bit longer, especially a brand new company, because they've got no domain authority. I'll just explain what that is a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Their website, every website is ranked by Google between 1 and 10. They don't tell us for years what that is, but there are other tools like Moz that tell us their kind of version of it called domain authority. And this helps Google to understand how authoritative that website is, i.e. how like the information on it, how trustworthy is it, how useful is it? And the way to get that is more links into your website. So a brand new website starts at 0 and you've got to build it up. Whereas a website that's maybe been around for 10 years has probably naturally got some links. It's got some press coverage occasionally, those sorts of things. So you're starting already from a point where you might get traffic. But if I started with search engine optimization for a brand new company, it's going to take probably over a year for them to see any benefit. And there's just a cost straight away. So we then think, oh, well, things like social media are actually not an expensive thing, and we can make an immediate impact. It's not necessarily something I've seen be huge lead generator, but it is a tactic available to us. Press coverage is maybe available to us, but they've got no projects. So how do you get that? Well, you can have an opinion about something. You can create a niche. You can enter contests and things. So we start carving out, how do you get that going? Normally, if they've started on their own and they've got no projects, they've normally thought about how they're going to, pay the bills for a few months at least, hopefully with some other work coming in. So there's not as much pressure for it to immediately turn into a lead machine straight away. But how you find, actually, I'm going to slightly deviate. And I used to work for a startup called mydeco.com. And it was Made.com's sister company, and we both went down in flames. But that's startup world. You go meteoric rise and crash. Some succeed. And my intern there, he then went to work afterwards for another startup that then got bought by another company, and they moved to Vegas. And it was like, he had this really great start to his career. And then he's become this kind of growth marketer, I think, is kind of what he said to me, people always focus on how I get 100 clients or 100 customers or something. They never really focus on that first one. And the way you get your first client is not the same as the way you get all 100. So find one, then find 2, then find 3, then find 10, then find 50. You don't start with a strategy to get 100 because you can be scrappy at the beginning. You can get the money in the bank and then start growing. So that's why I'm thinking, okay, well, rather than us just creating all these tactics that are going to create this stable pipeline for them, let's just get some money in so that, especially with architects, the projects last in a couple of years. Get a couple of projects in so that they've got work to work on, and then start building for the future.
I mean, this is a really good line of conversation, because there are loads of people at the moment. It's oddly enough, it's so funny how these things sometimes work out. Is I've just had 1, 2, 3, 4 conversations with people, I'm thinking in my head, who are all talking about this thing about how do they get, either they're not finding clients or they started practices without actually having work, or how do they get projects and stuff like that. So you go back to this, like when you have the stages of a practice, how do you rank those? So like what, 0 to 5 years kind of situation, or how do you spread it out?
There is, I use the, I can't think what it's called, the product life cycle. That's this kind of arch that an old marketing sort of thing. So you've got the growth stage, then you've got, you've got launch, growth, maturity, decline, I think. I can't remember exactly the terms, but it's roughly that. And the decline bit.
Are you saying that every business goes through the period of decline sort of later down the years?
Well, it's sort of, I mean, I've not always experienced, especially in architecture, it doesn't work in the same way, but it's that sort of product life cycle is used for, say, consumer products or something. If you were launching a toothpaste, how do you keep it interesting to people once it's gone through that maturity phase? Normally, like, they then have to, oh, we've added this new ingredient, and they kind of give it new life. And so you get to start that launch bit again. Or sometimes you kill off that product if you're in that kind of corporation where you think, okay, that's had its life. Let's launch something else now. So, but architecture doesn't work like that.
No, it does not.
So
but
I don't
wonder if there's a way.
That.
Well, I mean, maybe there's an element there of, like, you know, I always think about this sort of the first few years of a design studio. You know, they're quite generalist. They say yes to everything, which is appropriate. Like, you know how, you know, people in like in the business world always like, you know, niche down as fast as you can and be really specific. And I've kind of come around, my thinking on it has changed a little bit. I think when you're, especially if you think you're an artist, because you're going to be so interested in so many different things and you want to be creatively stimulated and excited about the work you're doing. So I'm wondering if, like, you know, in these early stages, it's like, you know, you say yes to everything, you don't really know what you're trying to achieve. But then over time you get more focused on what you want to do. And then maybe by that maturity phase, it's actually like, it's more about doubling down on what you believe and what you want to do. It's sort of having the confidence to get to that point when you're like, actually, no, I don't want to do X anymore. I want to do Y, and I'm going to focus on Y. And this is like, you're like that colleague you were talking about who wanted to be John Pawson, right?
Yeah.
It's like, no, this is actually really what I want to do. But what do you think, like, I have gotten my own thinking on how long this takes, but what is your instinct on that sort of, that life cycle?
Yeah. I mean, the launch phase, I think it is kind of that 6 months to a year, maybe a bit longer. I mean, startups, I think it's 5 years or something, less than 5 years. I think it's referred to as a startup. But I guess it depends on where you get to in that time. But at the very least 1 year, because then the growth bit starts quite low anyway and goes up quite high in that in the life cycle. So it's quite a long period, that growth bit. I think that's probably like then 1, 2 years to 10 years sort of thing. And then maybe it's 10 years onwards or something. Probably it's also maybe slightly link it closer to revenue as well.
Yeah.
Rather than just age of the company, because you could overnight, I mean, some people have had meteoric success really early on and then they're quite stable. But I guess even at that point, even that growth, I was talking to somebody, was it this week? Yeah, I think it was this week. No, what are we? Yeah, we're Friday. Yes, it was this week. And they used to work for a larger practice, I won't name, who had quite fast growth. So they went from kind of being maybe 10, 20 people up to kind of like 100 people in short space of time. And that has all of its challenges anyway. So even though you've had quite high success, you haven't really had time to reflect at any point or sort out processes and systems, and all that team is quite young in the company. So not young physically, but like new. And so you haven't really created a culture either. So, you know, it's like that is probably when you couldn't really say they're in their maturity phase, because actually they're still very much growing. Even if maybe they've hit that point, because, you know, I mean, I suppose they could be bigger than 100, but that's a big practice. So given that 82% are less than 3 people.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
82%, 3 people. But do you think that of that 82%, they want to stay that size?
I guess it ranges. There's a few that I've spoken to who are like, I just want to have enough work to keep working, and I don't want to get bigger. Or some that want to get a bit bigger, but, you know, they don't want to be managing people. I guess it depends on the characters. Some of those bigger ones that I've seen get bigger, the founders love to generate business and work on those bigger projects. And if you want to work on a big master plan scheme, you can't do that as a 3-man practice. Nobody's due diligence would allow that. For a small practice to do huge projects. It's quite hard to then win those projects as a small practice. I suppose it goes to show if there's less than 20% of the practices of more than 3 people, then all of those huge projects that you see going up, they're all handled by that 18% of the market.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
it's funny
hard to
because a
create.
couple weeks back, yeah, well, I mean, a couple weeks back, I was doing that Guerrilla Tactics conference, and they were talking a bit about partnerships and actually how the future of these small
Right.
practices is to, I mean, maybe if you're a 3-person band, I don't suspect that could probably work. But if you're like 10, 15, maybe even 20 people, partnering with
Yeah.
someone who's much bigger on much bigger projects is a really fantastic opportunity. And while there may be some behind the scenes things that are maybe slightly tricky, like negotiating fees or, all that kind of stuff, there's opportunity there to bring a sort of more agile, dynamic approach to these sort of bigger practices that are maybe a bit more like,
Yeah.
bit more robust and like harder to sort of shift and they're less dynamic. So it's kind of interesting because if you think about, I don't mean if you're a 3-person company, it's like if you do want to end up getting on some bigger schemes but don't want to grow, you can grow a little bit and not actually, but also make yourself quite attractive to other studios. So it's you don't have to create like a 60-person studio or a 150-person practice,
and then
which
maintain
does
that.
sound. Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, I get that. I mean, I think,
you've actually reminded me as well. What the thing that I'd forgotten about, you've reminded me by saying that.
Oh, good.
It was talking about that franchise idea.
Oh yeah.
And what they were kind of thinking about was we can create a business and an idea of how we approach architecture, and we can package it, and then other people could open offices under this name, and so they could be all over the country, and there's just multiple offices, but they're run almost quite independently as a franchise. But the benefit of it is the leads are generated in a central place. And so rather than everyone fighting in Google or fighting on social media or pitching for all this work, the pitching is done in a central place and then sent to an office that would work for it. So
there'd be like a head office, and then they would say farm out to a franchise, say in the Midlands or in the Southeast or whatever.
And there are some companies like this, like Resi, I think work on that basis. I think if I'm right, and then there's a few others that have started to. From my understanding, they tend to work on some of the smaller projects, so it's more at this premium level, how that works. But they all just work independently, and I can understand it as a running my own company. There's for the last few years, I've been talking to all the other kind of smaller PR marketing agencies, similar size to us. We're all very friendly, and I pitched to them this kind of group idea as well, where we're all independent, but we can fall under one name as well, and we can have work generated through that, but also we can share resources, we can share accountancy services and media databases and all those resources and were worked out. Okay, if all of us were just paying for all those individual services, we're paying like £1,000 a month. Split it over 10 practices, you're paying £100 a month. Or 10 agencies. Can I get anyone to say that to do it? No.
Really? Did they say why though? I mean, it's an interesting. Why not?
They're just quite happy in their world, kind of like, I don't really need that service. I don't need that. And I'm like, that's fine, but in principle, are you up for it? Let's just work out the details. But I think a lot of people they started on their own because they wanted to do it on their own. They really want to do it as part of a bigger thing, which is maybe slightly controlled by a wider, especially that franchise idea with the architects was, if you're almost delivering a product that is packaged up, this is how we approach architecture, then that's maybe not your vision of how you would do it. So
you'd have to be comfortable implementing a pre-designed vision in a sense, like, working from a playbook that has been pre-designed. Yeah. And I think go back to the thing of go ahead. No, I was saying, like if like the architect already thinks of themselves as an artist, why would you want to? It's like painting by numbers. No one wants to do that.
I mean, with this particular one, I can't really talk too much about it, but their idea of it was less. This is how I think projects look, but it's how we like, what's our process look like for architecture? And it was very interesting. I don't think they've got anywhere with that idea, but I could see how that could work. It's just that you are then dictating to somebody how they run their practice a little bit. And there's franchise models in all sorts of businesses, and I haven't seen it in architecture. But if we were approaching, I want to start a business, I've often thought this actually, is having worked with architects a lot, I'm like, should we just start an architecture practice? Because
I've thought about that too.
I'm like, I can find
we just do the back end. We would just make sure it ran really brilliantly and like let them go off and play and make the architecture and whatever. We'll just create these great systems.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's our business idea, Daniel. You and I can create like a franchise model for like structures of back end of architecture.
That's what we should do. We'll pick that up, and next year's podcast will be different. We'll be running an architecture practice.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of brings me to like, you said you've been going 10 years and stuff. So, like, what's next for you? Like, are you gonna? I mean, because we both I think agree that if you don't keep growing in a business, you can get really stagnant. So, like, what's the next thing on your plate? Are you thinking of keeping the digital marketing side of it and then going in a different direction? Like, what are you thinking behind it?
Yeah, I mean, still going, but definitely 10 years gave me a point to reflect on where we are. And thought, okay, what's the next 10 years look like? Although actually I quite like to retire a bit earlier.
Oh my God, can you believe we're even thinking about that stuff?
I had this kind of, I'm 43 now, and I had this, okay, let's aim for 50. It won't probably happen, but let's try. But to do that, I then thought, well, actually, agency work is, you just have to keep doing it until retirement. There's no kind of, maybe there's some profit that can come in out of it enough for somebody else to run it. But actually, it's very much about me working on things. So I started to think about products and what products we can create. Products in the broadest sense, a scalable business, which an agency isn't. So alongside the agency, we've been working for a couple of years now, just not really got into the launch phase of it, of two side businesses. One being a company called Cubisly, which is online courses and a community that helps smaller practices. So slightly kind of highlighting the fact that there are 82% or less than 3 people.
Huge market.
They can't afford to hire. Yeah. I've always, it comes back slightly for the passion of it. Years back, I realized, we don't really like working with larger practices too much, because I like to be able to work with the business owner and help affect their business. And there's enjoyment from seeing you get them more money so that they have a nicer, stable life.
Completely.
And so I realized, there's no shame in actually working with smaller practices. It's just they don't have the fees.
That is the best. But there is something to be said about that. It's like creating low touch or no touch, sort of, things that are easy for you to generate that actually can really help. I mean, it's, to us, maybe it feels fairly like basic stuff, but it can really make a difference in a practice. Is really beneficial. So what courses are you thinking then? Like what kind of subjects?
They're business and marketing related courses. One is called How to Launch an Architecture Practice.
Amazing.
Because there is clearly an appetite for it. Based on the Architecture Council of Europe one saying that there's 11,000 practices in the UK. They did another one in 2018, so only 4 years before, because this was 2022. And there were 8,000 practices. So it's grown more than 3,000 practices in that period of time.
Wow.
It makes me wonder what influence COVID had on that, because that's quite a growth in small practices.
I think COVID probably did play a big part in that. There were a lot of people who either got made redundant or got, were like, this, I don't want to work this way anymore.
Yeah.
3,000. Wow.
Yeah. And it gets even bigger when you start looking. I mean, I'm talking about the UK. Obviously, if you look at Europe, I started to highlight the companies like Germany, Italy, and I think it was Slovakia, weirdly had a huge, and more architects than the UK, I think. But we're in the top 4 of the UK of architecture practice, of quantity of architecture practices.
Right.
But looking across all of those, I mean, there's huge numbers in the 1 to 3. And I've always thought, how do we help those people? Because they deserve work just as much as the bigger practices.
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
and in some ways,
more.
they can benefit a lot more.
Yeah.
Because 1 or 2 jobs makes a real difference.
Yeah.
And it's hard to bring our fee down anymore because you're charging time. So if I reduce the fee, we're reducing the hours we do, and therefore you're achieving less. So that's never really worked. So we've often focused on just what to do, but I know that we just haven't been able to help those size practices for a long time. So things like how to launch an architecture practice is one. There's another one, which is how to build a website that converts. And
Amazing.
that is a 12-week course where actually I teach them to build their own website so that then they can maintain it themselves and don't have to pay someone to do it.
Amazing. Because that's it, isn't it? It's about making sure that they have the tools to do it themselves. You know, like I'm of the belief as well. It's like, I'm really happy when people don't need to work with us anymore, because it means that they figured, you know, we've given them enough tools that they don't need us. And that's great. Because the idea of just being a crutch in that sense, and they default to let someone else do it, it means that they never really get to grips with this stuff.
Yeah.
But if they get these tools, they can really build something, right? Because they know what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And I mean, I'd love to just, and also that it's actually quite an in-depth course on website building, rather than it being like, oh, let's just get a Wix site that looks nice. It's actually got embedding the search engine optimization work in it and conversion practice, like things, so that it works for them, rather than just, okay, now you've got a nice looking website, but it's not doing anything for you. There's lots of other courses, but and probably we will build out in the future more business and accounting ones. The questions that people have, essentially, answer those questions. And then the other side to it as well is there's another website we've had for a long time anyway, is the agency called Download for Press. And I created that just as a way for us to help the press get access to our client information, because you kind of store it in PDF press releases and things in Dropbox folders. It's not really accessible. Whereas this is they can go on, they can search, they can filter by types of businesses and find the information, and then download the assets immediately. And it just alerts us that they've downloaded it. I mean, it actually populates automatically into a database that they've downloaded it, that we can share with clients. And I was thinking about the future of that and thought, well, one, we want to open it up to a lot more people to use and make it incredibly affordable, really focused on smaller practices that if it's really affordable, because they might only be finishing 1 or 2 projects a year, they can't afford to have a service that's costing £50 a month or something. They don't want it. So it's a much less expensive option for that, but that's fine for us. It's a scalable thing. If 1,000 people are paying £10 a month, then I'm living happy.
Of course.
Then the other side to it is actually seeing what they need, I think, and what a lot of the skill that we have. It's the thing I've often thought about, and I've definitely talked to the team about it a lot, is what value does an agency bring? We can't be gatekeepers to the press. That's pointless, because the press can just go directly, or they don't need us. It's easy to speak to the press, but the relationships are there, and actually how to package things up so that they get noticed by the press. That's probably the hardest thing. All the follow-ups that we have to do with pitching stories to the press. We don't just send a press release out and then it just magically turns into coverage.
There's a lot more that goes into that. Oh, as an aside, I'm just curious, just from my own experience so far, it's like I'm starting to see that from a press point of view, that it's harder to get coverage than it ever has been. There's like, the market is super saturated, and sort of the standard photography
down.
It just feels like you just can't get the coverage, even if good isn't good enough anymore. You have to have an elevated story for projects.
I think it's the story. That's what we always focus in on, is like, oh, nice pictures, great, but everyone's got nice pictures.
Yeah. So what's the story? Yeah.
Yeah, and finding the hook in that story, that kind of makes it sound kind of simple, but what is, well, one, what message do we want to set? I mean, there's so much to this stuff actually,
Yeah.
that often architects will put together their own press release and it's very functional. It's kind of, this is what we did, this is what it looked like before, and this
Yeah.
is what the clients
Yeah.
asked, that kind of thing. And it's
Yeah.
a bit dry.
I'm always like,
That's great.
tell
That's
them
a
how you
case
help the
study.
client. Tell them like like how you made their life better. What's the story here? Like, what kind of
Yeah.
interesting things can we draw from this project? It's not just like,
Yeah.
oh, we did these types of tiles and this type of wood, and you're like,
Yeah.
no, that's not very interesting.
Yeah, it's why these things, and sometimes there's no why, and that's almost a bit of a shame. Sometimes we have to slightly make these things up, kind of retrospectively.
Yeah.
Think,
Well, I mean,
okay,
you can
what's the
fudge
story?
it too. I mean, if you want to, you can change the story,
Yeah,
can't you? If you have a client that doesn't want to be featured, you can tell a different story if you want. You don't have to be so
yeah,
literal about it. I think,
yeah. Just pull out one thread that you're like, that's it.
yeah,
Sometimes it's a quote. We had a client during COVID that I think abandoned the office kind of thing, was just like, okay, I mean, this was like early days, everyone's abandoned the office.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
not totally, but and I was like, okay, so everyone's doing these stories, we've got to think of something different. So actually it was, how do we make this quite a sensationalist sort of like, we need to go against the tide and say why you should do this. And it's slightly clickbaity approach of like, but it's the press are under pressure to get visits on their article to get advertising revenue. So you've got to kind of work with them in that way, where
yeah,
it's like, it's not just a nice project, but will somebody want to click on it and read it? That's, I mean, particularly like there's one journalist we often work with who writes for Forbes, and they get paid by impressions off their article. So
so it's really in their interest to make sure that the article it has the
yeah,
hook, because otherwise
yeah,
it's not, this is their
no
livelihood.
one can see it. And so they have to
Yeah.
either put out a lot, or the way that it works, like HuffPost did in the same way, where when they sort of seem to be doing well, these articles, they might appear on the homepage and then they kind of skyrocket.
Yeah.
But they've got to have that initial interest for them to make it to the front page. So even the journalist then has to be posted on social media. So if the architect is kind of reposting the article, it helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
those things. It's quite a hard practice for them now, really. So getting it right, and that's where I thought we could probably help with that part. It's just connecting. Like, you give us the material, and then we offer this kind of service that is just, this is what I would do with it. And it's almost like a workshop sort of session, a short sort of book-in, an hour workshop, where workshop what the story is and then pitch it out. And it's just a fee kind of just to do that process. So, and that way it can help smaller practices. And it's a short period. We've automated some of the process in order to make it affordable to do that. That's the key thing, I think, is having to try and look at where a human has to interact with it, and where we can use machines to do some of that process. I could go off on hours on that, actually.
I was going to say, do you want to even tap into the AI side of things?
Yeah, I mean, for our 10th birthday, I put together this based on our original thinkers idea. I was like, oh, let's celebrate original thinkers. So we picked 30 people. They're on the octobercoms.com website. And the original thinkers, they're not all just architecture and designers. I've got people like Debbie Harry and Kate Bush in there, and people, but it's people who always had like an original approach to things, but there are a lot of architecture and design.
Yeah.
And we used ChatGPT to generate the content about them. I checked it afterwards. Actually, I did it twice, because when I first did it, it was ChatGPT 3, and then 4 came out, and it was just wildly better. And I was like, okay, ditch all that, let's start again. And hoping that before ChatGPT 5 came out, and it was way better. But everything that's going on in the news right now, I don't think that's coming anytime soon.
Well, yeah. I've started working with Bard a lot, which is Google's version. And I really like the interface on it. It actually, I can't get over my sort of, I don't know, obviously I'm not English, but I have a lot of Englishness about me. And I keep wanting to say like please and thank you to it and like ask it really politely. Like, can you please
Yeah.
do this again? Thank you so much. Smiley face.
I've been really sarcastic to ChatGPT because it just amuses me. Where once I was saying, "Oh, could you redo this, in this way?" and it came back. It was like, "I'm so sorry, I misunderstood you." And I was thinking, and I just replied back and went, "I don't want your apologies. I want you to do it right." But I'm just joking. I mean, it's not got any feelings.
Yeah, of course. What did it say when you said that? They're like, "I'm so sorry, master."
Yeah. I should be careful. The robots will remember me doing that.
They will remember you. They'll be coming for you in about 50 years' time.
Yeah.
You old man in a chair.
And I'm hiding in some shed in the woods.
Okay, so just for fun, we do 3 quick fire questions for you at the end of the pod, just for fun, just to kind of end the day. So I'll go, this is quite fun. So if your business had a mascot, what would it be?
Oh, God, that's a tough one. How do people answer that question? You must have, this is like personas, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example, not to interrupt, but I feel like our business would be like a sea otter, because we're like a little bit silly, but we take what we do very seriously.
Right.
We build in safeguards so that we don't float away. We're very, very practical creatures.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of something that's kind of like working behind the scenes hard, but not taking any glory. That's kind of definitely.
I feel like maybe like a bee.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Worker bee, kind of. I can see that. Yeah. I'm gonna say a bee.
Okay, you're gonna say a bee. Yeah, it does fit your colors. What's your favorite thing about your job?
Definitely when we get to help like smaller businesses, and you can see them. Like there's so much more enjoyment about seeing, in this period of time, their business has changed. They've now got a sustainable like pipeline of work. I know that sounds really boring in a way, but it's so satisfying when you can actually affect things and not just sort of every day is the same. And if I did a good job today or didn't do a good job, it probably won't make a big difference. I mean, this is a reason I'm exhausted after 10 years too, because we work hard, but that's the reason. That's the reason I get up and get at a desk every day.
Yeah, I really feel that. Some of these are more architecture related, but all right, here's the last one. Form or function?
Oh, right. Well, I mean, my early career was spent working for Dieter Rams, so which I was incredibly lucky for, because I was looking after his press, and I was like 24. It was crazy. And so I think I've got to go with function.
That seems to be about right. I mean, to be fair, it's like you and I are both about the function side of things.
Yeah.
I mean,
from his school of thought, which I've always carried through as well, is that, and actually, I mean, I'm going to Apple are often talked about in line with Dieter Rams, but there's often I'm like frustrated by Apple products because they make everything look beautiful but forget some of the function. So an on button or an off button, like that could be a color to make it easier for someone to interact with it. And that was Dieter Rams.
The fact that like my Magic Mouse has the charger underneath, so I can't charge it while I'm working with it. That's so stupid. Why did they do that? Yeah. I know. Function comes first.
Or like the iMac has the on button behind, and it's like you're fumbling around trying to find this on button. That's not practical. You could put it on the front, but it would make it. You were like, that's not going to be pretty. So I definitely am in the function.
You're in the function camp. Well, Daniel, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. If people want to follow you and find your ideas, where is the best place to look for you?
On all social media, it's October Comms, 2 M's, and then the new companies and business things that will launch next year. Cubisly is one, but that will be linked from October Comms anyway. So go to October.
Well, we can also put the links in the notes of the podcast as well, so people can come find it if they're interested in hearing more. So thank you so much. That's been so great, and I don't know what else to say, but thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's always nice to chat to you anyway. We've rambled on for an hour easily.
I know, it's really true. I actually feel like it's good. We've actually capped it at an hour, so we've done pretty well. So,
Yeah.
all
With a bit
right.
of
Thanks so much,
editing.
Daniel.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again to Daniel for taking the time to talk to me. For me, this conversation really reiterated the importance of having a marketing strategy in a design business. The market is so saturated, so knowing why you stand out is absolutely crucial. Once again, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, all those sorts of things. We'll be dropping new episodes every Tuesday, and until then, be well. Understories was produced by Cloudfields and Kieran Fowler. The music is by Aves, and the branding is by Joe Jones. See you next week.